What if I told you that the most valuable thing hidden inside a rusted old tractor wasn't the engine, but a promise that had been waiting 36 years to be found? When 38-year-old Nathan Brooks bought a forgotten Farmall 806 at a small Pennsylvania auction, everyone thought he had wasted his money. But behind the dashboard, he uncovered a hidden message that would lead him on a journey to reunite a family, uncover a lifetime of sacrifice, and prove that some promises never disappear. They simply wait for the right person to bring them home. Late autumn settled quietly over the farmlands of Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Beneath a pale gray sky, cold winds carried the scent of damp earth and harvested cornfields, while rows of golden straw stretched across the countryside, awaiting another long winter. Nathan Brooks had always believed that broken machines deserved one more chance before anyone called them worthless. At 38 years old, he stood just over 6 feet tall with the broad shoulders and powerful forearms of a man who had spent most of his life lifting engines instead of office paperwork. His short dark brown hair was beginning to show faint strands of gray around the temples long before he thought it should. A neatly trimmed beard softened the sharp angles of his weathered face, while deep green eyes reflected equal parts patience, curiosity, and quiet determination. Years of repairing tractors, combines, balers, and aging farm equipment had permanently stained the lines of his rough hands with oil that no soap could completely remove. His friends often joked that Nathan could diagnose an engine simply by listening to it idle for 10 seconds. They admired his skill because he never rushed repairs or replaced parts that could still be saved. His father had once told him, "Machines aren't stubborn. They're just waiting for someone willing to understand them." Nathan had carried those words into every workshop he ever entered. For more than 15 years, he worked at Miller Agricultural Equipment Repair, one of Lancaster County's oldest independent repair shops. The owner, Robert Miller, had taught Nathan almost everything he knew about diesel engines, hydraulic systems, and restoring machinery that everyone else considered beyond saving. But the world around them slowly changed. Large dealerships offered cheaper replacements than repairs. Farmers traded aging equipment for newer computerized models. One rainy September morning, Robert gathered the remaining mechanics inside the quiet workshop. His shoulders looked smaller than Nathan remembered. With tired blue eyes hidden behind thick glasses, the 68-year-old owner quietly explained that he could no longer keep the business alive. After nearly half a century, the shop would close its doors forever. Nathan did not blame him. He blamed time. 3 weeks later, he carried his toolbox into the back of his aging pickup truck and drove away, without knowing where life would take him next. His small rented garage outside Lancaster soon became both his workshop and his only source of income. He began purchasing neglected farm equipment at estate sales, restoring it piece by piece, then selling it for modest profits. Some months, he earned enough to pay every bill. Other months, he wondered how much longer he could continue before empty savings forced him to find another career. Yet every time an old tractor roared back to life beneath his hands, something inside him felt alive again. One chilly Saturday morning, a large estate auction drew farmers from 3 counties to a former dairy farm outside Intercourse, Pennsylvania. Pickup trucks filled the muddy field before sunrise. Buyers crowded around late-model tractors, skid steers, grain drills, and nearly new hay balers. Auctioneers shouted numbers into microphones while engines started one after another, each machine competing for attention. Nathan walked slowly through the crowd carrying a notebook instead of bidding cards. He rarely chased expensive equipment. Everyone else fought over machines that looked ready for another 20 years of work. Nathan searched for the ones everyone ignored. Near the very end of the auction grounds, almost hidden behind stacks of rusted cultivators and broken wagons, stood an old Farmall 806. Its faded red paint had almost disappeared beneath decades of rust and dust. One rear tire had gone completely flat. The cracked steering wheel leaned awkwardly toward the worn seat, now split by years of sun and rain. Cobwebs stretched beneath the dashboard. Small birds had built a nest beneath the hood sometime during the previous spring. The engine refused to turn even by hand. Most buyers walked past without slowing down. One farmer laughed. "That thing's worth more by the pound." Another shook his head. "Too far gone." Nathan said nothing. Instead, he crouched beside the tractor. His fingers brushed across the heavy cast-iron frame. Despite the neglect, Nothing appeared broken beyond repair. The metal carried scars, not death. He opened the engine compartment carefully. The block remained intact. No visible cracks. Transmission housing looked solid. Hydraulic lines were badly weathered but complete. Even the original serial plate remained attached. Someone had once cared deeply for this machine. That much was obvious. The auctioneer barely paused before calling for bids. "Who'll give me 800? Silence. 600. Still nothing. Nathan quietly raised one hand. The hammer fell almost immediately. For less than the price of scrap steel, the old Farmall belonged to him. Several nearby buyers smiled politely, convinced they had just witnessed an expensive mistake. Nathan simply loaded the tractor onto his trailer. As he tightened the chains, he rested one hand against the faded hood. "We'll see," he whispered. Back inside his garage, the restoration began exactly the way every project did. Photographs first. Labels on every wire. Careful notes. Nothing removed without documenting where it belonged. Over the next 2 days, Nathan stripped away years of dirt, mouse nests, brittle wiring, and rusted electrical components. He carefully removed the instrument cluster to inspect damaged gauges and corroded wiring hidden behind the dashboard. As the final screws loosened, the panel shifted forward. Something caught his attention. The backside of the steel dashboard had been scratched deliberately by hand many years earlier. Not random marks. Words. Nathan wiped away decades of dust. His heartbeat slowed. The message became clear. "If this tractor ever comes back, tell Emma I kept my promise." He stared at the sentence for several long moments. No last name. No date. No explanation. Only those 11 words. They felt strangely personal. Almost as if someone had believed the tractor would someday find its way home. Nathan leaned back against the workbench. Most people would have smiled at the mystery and continued repairing the engine. But he couldn't. Someone had taken the time to hide those words where almost nobody would ever find them. Someone wanted Emma to know something. And somehow, after 36 years, Nathan believed he had become part of that unfinished story. He picked up his notebook and wrote only one sentence. "Find Emma." Then curiosity whispered one more question. What else had been hidden? He reached deeper behind the dashboard, loosened another rusted metal panel, and slowly pulled it free. His fingers touched brittle paper. Carefully, almost afraid it might fall apart, Nathan slid an old sealed envelope from the darkness where it had remained untouched for decades. Nathan barely slept that night. Outside, cold November rain tapped softly against the metal roof of his workshop, while the old Farmall 806 rested beneath bright overhead lights, its rusted body silently guarding secrets that had survived more than 3 decades. With steady hands, Nathan carried the brittle envelope to his wooden workbench. Years spent restoring antique machinery had taught him patience. Old paper deserved the same respect as old engines. He carefully slid a thin knife beneath the yellowed flap, opening it without tearing the fragile edges. Inside rested 4 items. The first was a faded family photograph. A smiling man stood proudly beside the very same Farmall 806 when its paint still shone bright red. Beside him stood a woman holding his arm. They looked no older than their early 30s. Behind them, 2 young boys smiled in front of a white farmhouse surrounded by cornfields. The second photograph showed the tractor pulling hay wagons during harvest. The third captured Christmas morning inside a modest farmhouse, the family gathered around a decorated tree. The final picture was different. Only the woman remained. She stood beside the tractor alone. Although she smiled for the camera, sadness lingered quietly behind her eyes. Nathan turned the photographs over. Only one name appeared. Emma. Beneath the photographs lay the original Pennsylvania registration for the tractor. Model, Farmall 806. Year registered, 1988. Owner, Walter Green. Finally, Nathan unfolded several neatly folded pages. It was a handwritten letter. The ink had faded slightly, but every word remained readable. My dearest Emma, if you're reading this, something must have gone terribly wrong. I know what everyone will probably believe. They'll say I ran away. They'll say I abandoned you because of the debts. Please don't believe them. Everything I have done was for family. Nathan continued reading in complete silence. Walter explained that his younger brother's dairy farm had collapsed after several disastrous seasons. Banks were preparing to seize the property, leaving Walter's brother, his wife, and their children with nowhere to go. Walter had quietly made a decision. He sold nearly everything he owned. The tractor, his equipment, his savings, even part of his own land. He transferred the money without telling anyone the full truth because he feared Emma would insist on sacrificing their own future as well. Then he accepted construction work hundreds of miles away in Ohio, hoping to rebuild enough money to return home within 2 years. I promised myself I would come back before another harvest passed. I wanted to surprise you. I wanted us to buy everything back. Nathan paused. His throat tightened. The final page explained why that promise had never been kept. Only 3 months after arriving in Ohio, Walter suffered severe injuries when scaffolding collapsed at the construction site. Months of hospitalization followed. By the time he recovered enough to work again, permanent injuries prevented him from returning to farming. Ashamed that he had nothing left to offer his family, Walter continued taking temporary labor jobs while saving every dollar he could. He never stopped planning to return. But life moved faster than hope. The letter ended abruptly. There are still things I need to tell you. When I finally come home, there were no more words. The remaining page was blank. Nathan slowly folded the letter closed. He understood immediately. Walter had never finished writing it. He probably believed he would soon deliver it himself. Instead, it remained hidden inside the tractor for 36 years. The following morning, Nathan drove to the Lancaster County Recorder's office. Most property archives from the late 1980s had already been digitized. An elderly records clerk named Helen Foster greeted him with a warm smile. At 65 years old, Helen possessed neatly styled silver hair, kind brown eyes behind thin reading glasses, and a gentle face that reflected decades of helping strangers uncover forgotten pieces of local history. She spoke softly, moved carefully through towering shelves of old documents, and believed every historical record represented someone's life rather than merely paperwork. Nathan explained what he had discovered. Helen searched quietly for nearly an hour. Eventually, she stopped. I found him. She printed several documents. Walter Green. She hesitated. Officially listed as missing after the Susquehanna River flood of 1989. Nathan frowned. Missing? Helen nodded. The public believed he disappeared because of financial problems. Local newspaper articles described Walter as another struggling farmer overwhelmed by debt. Rumors spread quickly after his disappearance. Some believed he fled to avoid bankruptcy. Others insisted he abandoned his family. No evidence ever proved either story. Nathan looked down at Walter's unfinished letter. Every rumor had been wrong. Before leaving, Helen handed him one final document. An employment record from Ohio. Construction company. Hospital report. Death certificate. Walter Green had died quietly several years later from complications related to the injuries he suffered after the construction accident. Nathan sat inside his truck for several minutes without starting the engine. The man had never broken his promise willingly. He simply never received another chance. That evening, Nathan spread every photograph across his workbench beside the old Farmall. His eyes stopped once again on the woman standing beside the tractor. Emma. She had waited without ever knowing the truth. Nathan quietly opened his notebook. Below yesterday's sentence. Find Emma. He added 4 more words. Tell her everything. The next morning, carrying Walter's letter, the old photographs, and the original tractor registration, Nathan began searching for one person. Emma Green. The first frost settled softly across the Amish countryside of Lancaster County. Thin ribbons of morning mist drifted between weathered barns and quiet farmhouses, while horse-drawn buggies rolled slowly along narrow country roads beneath bare maple trees, waiting for winter. Nathan Brooks left before sunrise with the restored Farmall 806 secured carefully behind his pickup truck. He had spent the previous 2 weeks repairing only what was necessary to make the tractor run safely again. He refused to repaint it. Every scratch, every faded patch of red paint, every dent belonged to Walter Green's story. Even the small weld on the left rear fender remained untouched after Nathan carefully cleaned decades of rust away. Somehow, he felt changing those marks would erase part of the man who had left them behind. Helen Foster's records had eventually led him to a quiet Amish community nearly 40 miles away. Emma Green still lived there. The closer Nathan drove, the quieter the world became. Modern traffic disappeared. Cornfields gave way to neatly tended gardens, white fences, and modest farmhouses surrounded by simple beauty. It felt like entering a place where time had chosen to slow down instead of racing ahead. Emma Green answered the front door herself. She was 74 years old now, small in stature at barely 5 feet 3, with delicate shoulders that age had gently rounded but never weakened. Soft silver hair rested neatly beneath a simple white prayer cap, framing a kind face lined by decades of waiting rather than bitterness. Her pale blue eyes remained remarkably bright despite carrying the quiet sadness of someone who had learned to live beside unanswered questions. Her hands were slender, their skin softened by years of quilting, baking bread, tending flowers, and caring for a home that had slowly grown far quieter than she ever imagined. She wore a plain navy blue Amish dress beneath a gray shawl, and a simple gold wedding ring still rested on her left hand, polished by habit rather than vanity. There was nothing dramatic about Emma's appearance. Yet Nathan immediately sensed the quiet strength that had allowed her to keep moving forward without ever completely letting go of hope. "Mrs. Green?" Nathan asked gently. She smiled politely. "Yes. My name is Nathan Brooks. I believe I have something that belongs to your family." Emma looked confused but invited him inside. The little farmhouse was spotless. Everything reflected careful hands and quiet routines. A cast-iron stove warmed the kitchen. Hand-sewn quilts rested across worn wooden chairs. Shelves held family photographs spanning generations. Fresh bread cooled beside the window. Yet Nathan noticed something else. Nothing had truly changed. An old coat still hung beside the front door. A pair of worn leatherwork boots rested neatly underneath. A faded brown hat remained hanging on its wooden hook, as though someone might return that evening and put them on again. Emma followed Nathan's eyes. "I couldn't throw them away." She smiled softly. It never felt right. Nathan quietly placed Walter's letter onto the kitchen table. Then the photographs. Finally, he unfolded the original tractor registration. Emma stared at the documents. Her hands began trembling before she even touched them. She recognized Walter's handwriting immediately. Tears slowly filled her eyes. "He always crossed his T's like that," she whispered. Nathan said nothing. He simply waited while Emma carefully unfolded the unfinished letter. She read every word in complete silence. Only the ticking kitchen clock broke the stillness. When she reached the unfinished final page, she gently pressed the paper against her chest. For several minutes, she could not speak. Finally, she looked toward Nathan. "They told me." Her voice almost disappeared. "They told me he left because he stopped loving us." Nathan quietly shook his head. He never stopped. He spent everything trying to save his brother's family. Emma closed her eyes. For 36 years, she had carried questions no one could answer. Now, the answers hurt. But they also healed. Nathan stepped outside. "There is one more thing." Emma slowly followed him onto the porch. The Farmall 806 waited quietly on the trailer. For several seconds, she simply stared. Then she walked toward it almost as if afraid the tractor might disappear. Her fingers brushed the faded hood. She smiled through tears. "I polish this every Saturday." She moved farther along the left side, then suddenly stopped. Her hand rested upon the rear fender. There, beneath years of faded paint, remained a rough weld joining two pieces of steel together. Emma laughed and cried at the same time. He hated that weld. She wiped away tears. He backed into the old hay wagon our second year of marriage. He stayed awake until midnight fixing it because he couldn't afford another fender. She rested her forehead gently against the cool steel. "It really is ours." Word spread faster than Nathan expected. A neighbor driving past recognized Emma standing beside the tractor. Within hours, people throughout the Amish community began arriving quietly. Then local farmers. Then reporters from Lancaster. Everyone had believed the same story for decades. Walter Green abandoned his family. Now they discovered something entirely different. He had sacrificed everything for people he loved. Yet fate had stolen his chance to explain. 3 days later, the Lancaster County newspaper published the story across its front page. Television stations soon followed. Photographs of Emma standing beside the old Farmall appeared across Pennsylvania. Viewers did not see an old tractor. They saw 36 years of waiting finally answered. Messages poured in from strangers across the country. Some shared stories of missing relatives. Others spoke about promises that had survived time. Many simply thanked Nathan for refusing to ignore 11 handwritten words hidden behind an old dashboard. Late one evening, after the last visitors had gone home, Emma gently folded Walter's letter and placed it beside their wedding photograph. Looking toward Nathan, she smiled with peaceful eyes. For the first time in 36 years. She whispered, I finally know why he never came home. Winter slowly gave way to early spring across Lancaster County. Gentle rain washed the last traces of snow from the fields while pale green shoots emerged beneath old maple trees. Cool morning air carried the scent of damp soil and freshly turned farmland, reminding everyone that another season of planting and another season of hope had quietly begun. Nathan Brooks returned to his workshop with a renewed purpose. Until now, he had restored the Farmall 806 simply to make it run again. After meeting Emma Green, however, every bolt, every scratch, and every faded piece of paint had become part of Walter Green's story. Nathan no longer saw himself as a mechanic restoring an old tractor. He had become the caretaker of a family's history. He worked slowly. Weeks passed without rushing a single detail. Instead of replacing original metal whenever possible, he carefully cleaned it. Rust disappeared beneath patient hands. Bearings were rebuilt. Hydraulic seals were replaced. The diesel engine finally came back to life with the same deep, steady rhythm it had carried across Pennsylvania fields more than 3 decades earlier. One afternoon, while removing several thick layers of faded red paint from the tractor's hood using careful chemical stripping rather than aggressive sanding, Nathan noticed something unusual. Another color appeared beneath. Not factory paint, hand-painted markings. He slowed immediately. Little by little, the hidden image emerged. Across both sides of the hood, beneath years of repainting, remained the original Green Family Farm logo, a simple golden wheat stalk surrounded by a green circle with the initials GFF painted carefully by hand decades earlier. Nathan smiled. Walter had wanted everyone to know exactly where that tractor belonged, but the discoveries were not finished. While restoring the rear axle housing, Nathan found dozens of tiny marks carved into the inside edge of a steel inspection plate. At first they looked random. Then he counted them. Every mark carried a small handwritten year beside it. Small symbols. Corn. Hay. Rain. Stars. Walter had quietly carved tiny seasonal symbols after every successful harvest, creating a private record of each farming year the tractor had helped complete. Some seasons carried only one small star. Others displayed rows of wheat heads. One year included a tiny heart. Nathan quietly laughed. Walter had apparently celebrated his wedding anniversary by carving the smallest heart imaginable where almost nobody would ever find it. Machines truly remembered. News of Emma's reunion with Walter's story had continued spreading throughout Pennsylvania. One morning Nathan received an unexpected phone call. The caller introduced herself as Dr. Caroline Hughes, the 52-year-old director of the Pennsylvania Agricultural Heritage Museum. Caroline possessed shoulder-length silver blonde hair, thoughtful blue eyes behind elegant rectangular glasses, and the composed confidence of someone who had spent her career preserving rural history. Tall and slender with a calm, welcoming voice, she believed that ordinary farming families deserved the same historical respect often reserved for famous political figures. Having grown up on a small dairy farm herself before studying agricultural history, she understood that old machinery often carried stories far more valuable than the metal itself. After listening carefully, she made an extraordinary offer. The museum would like to purchase the Farmall. She paused. We're prepared to pay whatever is necessary. The amount she mentioned exceeded anything Nathan had imagined. The money could purchase a larger workshop, modern equipment, financial security. For several long moments, he remained silent. Finally, he smiled. I'm honored, but it isn't mine to sell. A week later, Nathan drove to Emma's farmhouse. He explained the museum's offer. Emma listened quietly before walking outside to where the tractor rested beneath the spring sunshine. She gently touched Walter's old steering wheel. If this tractor disappears into a museum warehouse, she said softly, people will admire the machine. She looked toward Nathan. But they'll never meet Walter. Nathan nodded. Together they reached the same conclusion. Instead of selling history, they would share it. With help from neighbors, local churches, and the Lancaster farming community, they organized a free public exhibition inside an old restored dairy barn donated for the weekend by a nearby family. No admission, no tickets, only one request posted at the entrance. Come remember someone you love. Nobody expected what happened next. Long before sunrise, cars already stretched down the country road. Families arrived from across Pennsylvania, then Ohio, Delaware, Maryland, Some came to see the famous tractor. Most stayed because of the story. Emma sat beside the Farmall throughout the weekend, quietly answering questions. Nathan demonstrated how Walter had hidden the letter behind the dashboard. Children climbed onto nearby hay bales listening as older farmers spoke about harvests long past. Visitors did something neither Nathan nor Emma had planned. They began bringing their own forgotten treasures. An old pocket watch carried through World War II. A rusted milk pail bearing a grandfather's initials. Letters discovered inside attic walls. A faded photograph recovered from a burned farmhouse. One family reunited two brothers after discovering identical carvings inside separate antique toolboxes built by their father. Another elderly woman finally shared her late husband's unfinished diary with her grandchildren. The exhibition slowly became something much larger than one tractor. It became a place where forgotten memories found voices again. By the final afternoon, more than 4,000 visitors had walked through the barn. Television cameras focused on the old Farmall. But what viewers remembered most wasn't the machine. It was the people standing beside it. As the sun began setting beyond the Pennsylvania countryside, Nathan looked across the crowded barn. Children laughed. Grandparents cried. Families embraced one another. The old Farmall 806 stood quietly at the center. No longer simply a restored tractor. It had become a symbol that honesty, memory, and love could survive far longer than anyone imagined. 3 years later, autumn once again painted Lancaster County in shades of gold and crimson. Cool winds swept gently across harvested fields, carrying the familiar scent of fresh hay, damp earth, and wood smoke. Tractors moved slowly through quiet farm roads beneath brilliant maple trees, reminding everyone that every harvest eventually became another story waiting to be remembered. Life had changed in ways Nathan Brooks never imagined. His small garage outside Lancaster was gone. In its place stood a beautifully restored timber workshop built from reclaimed barn wood collected throughout Pennsylvania. Visitors often expected to find rows of shiny tractors waiting to be sold. Instead, they found something entirely different. Every machine inside carried a handwritten history. Photographs, family names, old letters, personal memories. Nathan had quietly transformed his business from restoring machinery for profit into preserving agricultural history for future generations. Above the entrance hung a hand-carved wooden sign that greeted every visitor before they stepped inside. Every machine remembers the hands that built a family. People stopped to read those words almost every day. Many stood silently for several moments before continuing inside. They understood immediately that this was not an ordinary restoration shop. The Farmall 806 remained there as well, not displayed behind ropes, not hidden beneath glass. It stood exactly as Walter Green had once driven it, occasionally started and carefully maintained, surrounded by photographs from the exhibition, copies of Walter's unfinished letter, and stories donated by hundreds of families whose forgotten heirlooms had found new meaning after Emma's remarkable reunion. The story had traveled much farther than Lancaster County. Several agricultural museums across Pennsylvania developed educational exhibits inspired by Walter Green's sacrifice. Local schools invited Nathan and Emma to speak during agricultural heritage programs. History teachers no longer spoke only about machinery. They spoke about integrity, family, sacrifice, and promises. Students listened carefully as they learned that history was not built only by famous people. Sometimes it survived inside an ordinary tractor waiting quietly in the corner of an auction yard. Emma Green attended whenever her health allowed. Although now 77 years old, she remained remarkably gentle and graceful. Time had slowed her steps, but it had not diminished the peaceful kindness that had always defined her. She often sat beside the Farmall greeting children with the same warm smile Walter had once loved. Many asked whether she still missed him. Emma always answered the same way. Every day. Then she smiled softly. But now I no longer wonder why. That single sentence often left entire classrooms in silence. Nathan found himself becoming something unexpected. Not a businessman. Not even simply a mechanic. He became a storyteller. Families began bringing forgotten tractors, plows, seed drills, and wagons from old barns throughout Pennsylvania, hoping Nathan could help uncover the histories hidden inside them. Sometimes they discovered old photographs. Sometimes handwritten repair notes. Occasionally military medals, wedding rings, children's drawings tucked beneath wooden seats. Not every machine held dramatic secrets, but every machine carried someone's life. One quiet October afternoon, a young reporter interviewed Nathan inside the workshop while sunlight streamed through tall barn windows onto the restored Farmall. She looked around the building filled with carefully preserved machinery before asking the question he had heard many times. Out of everything you discovered inside Walter Green's tractor, what was the most valuable thing? Nathan looked toward the old Farmall for several long seconds. His eyes rested on the dashboard where 11 simple handwritten words had changed his life forever. Then he smiled. It wasn't the tractor. His voice remained calm. It was the promise someone never stopped keeping. The interview spread across farming communities nationwide. People repeated those words far more often than they repeated Nathan's name. Years continued passing. New restoration apprentices joined the workshop, learning not only mechanical skills, but also the importance of documenting every family story before replacing a single bolt. Museums continued inviting Nathan to speak. Schools added Walter Green's story to local agricultural history lessons. The exhibition barn where Emma first shared Walter's letter became an annual gathering place where families brought heirlooms, photographs, journals, and forgotten keepsakes to preserve together. Eventually, people stopped talking about the rusted Farmall that nobody wanted at the estate auction. The auction itself faded into memory. So did the price Nathan paid. Even the tractor slowly became secondary. What people remembered instead was far simpler. A small handwritten sentence hidden behind an old dashboard. A promise that waited 36 years for someone patient enough to notice it. A mechanic who chose curiosity instead of convenience. A wife who never stopped believing. And a farmer whose love survived far longer than anyone had imagined possible. Long after headlines disappeared and cameras moved elsewhere, visitors still paused beneath the wooden sign inside Nathan's workshop before quietly walking among the restored machines. Many reached out and gently touched the old Farmall. Not because it was rare, not because it was valuable, but because it reminded them of something every generation eventually learns. Time can cover metal with rust. It can fade photographs. It can yellow old letters. But love, sacrifice, and promises faithfully made leave marks that neither weather nor years can erase. Sometimes, God's miracles are not loud. They don't always arrive as lightning from heaven or impossible events. Sometimes they are hidden inside an old letter, a forgotten machine, or a promise that survives decades because love refused to let it die. God has a way of bringing truth into the light at exactly the right time, reminding us that no act of kindness, sacrifice, or faithfulness is ever truly forgotten. In our own lives, there may be relationships that need healing, promises that need keeping, or someone who is still waiting to hear words we've been afraid to say. While we still have time, let's choose forgiveness, honesty, and love, because those are the things that outlive us. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs a little hope today. Leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from, or share a promise you'll never forget. And if you enjoy stories of faith, family, and second chances, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and join us for more inspiring journeys. May God bless you, your family, and your home. May He strengthen your faith, guide your path, and remind you that His timing is always perfect. Amen.